Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Whether it's spring planting, fall harvesting, or just a drive across the state, soy biodiesel helps a diesel-powered engine operate in a demanding job. Soybean oil from Nebraska soybeans makes biodiesel a renewable fuel that's also environmentally responsible. The soybean checkoff plays a major role in supporting the use and availability of biodiesel. The Nebraska Soybean Board, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We've returned from the 2013 World Soybean Research Conference in Durban, South Africa. In upcoming episodes, you'll see our interviews with researchers and industry professionals, including discussions on soybean cyst nematode, soybean breeding, and foliar fungicide applications. We'll also show you next week why the African continent has the potential to become a major player in the agricultural world. But because of the timeliness of the Brazilian soybean harvest, in a few minutes we'll bring you our conversation regarding the size of that country's crop and its current export problems with Alexandre José Cattelan of Embrapa Soybean in Brazil. Later in the show, we'll look ahead at the precipitation outlook into spring with Al Dutcher, and we'll monitor current pasture conditions and future grazing options with UNL Extension educator Berger. We said at the end of the last episode we would also be reporting from the recent Women in Ag conference, but last week's snowstorm changed our travel plans. Our marketing analyst this week is Mike Briggs. In the latest cattle on feed report, inventory for cattle on feed in the U.S. dropped 6% year over year, while placements rose 2% in the same time frame. We spoke with Mike Wednesday morning about the concerns for consumer demand and activity in the markets over the last month.
Well, what we saw in January, we actually produced more beef than we did last year with less cattle, and that was a function of the huge spread between the December board and the February board. It was just begging you to take cattle over, roll cattle forward, and we did it too. We took cattle that probably should have went in December, and they ended up going in January, and they were bigger because the weather was pretty good, and we produced a lot of beef in January, a typically bad demand time, so we kind of doubled down on ourselves. And once all that beef was produced and didn't get consumed, it drug the markets down pretty hard.
I want to talk about demand. We had talked over the last few months about the payroll tax that was going to hit. It came through, and I think people probably saw in their paychecks a little bit bigger of a hit than they thought they might see.
I agree.
And the gas prices are also going back up. So do those two things kind of equal a slack in demand?
Absolutely, because that directly affects disposable income for people. You know, that 2% payroll tax increase, it affected your paycheck a little more than maybe you thought it was going to, and then gas is going up again. It's all about disposable income. If people don't have available income to buy an elevated or a luxury item like beef, they're not going to do it.
Yeah, concerned even going through grilling season? Obviously we're not there yet based on
We're not
today,
there
right?
yet. There's going to be a concern. If we don't continue to build some momentum in the economy, I think the market struggles. You know, everybody was convinced that, oh, we're going to trade cattle at $1.50. No, you're not, because the economy is not going to support it. I don't know if we can get to $1.40. I hope we can get back to the mid 130s, because I'm telling you, most of these cattle that break even are between 135 and probably 142.3 on the top side. Those cattle are going to lose a world of money after people have already lost a world of money. So this thing could get worse than it already is as a cattle feeder.
Okay, but do you think there's any ground below that, or are we at the ground floor right now?
I think we put our low in the futures market last week. I think we put our low in. It's just a matter of how far we can drive it. Now, the thing that none of us have ever seen is we've never seen beef supplies as short as they're going to get, and there's been a lot of anticipation of that, and probably too much, and it's why we got the markets too high. The question is, and we're into a situation where it's going to be prove-it time. The cash market's going to have to prove that the cattle can go up. How far can they go up? I don't know. Exports have been good, and I think exports are going to have to really be there to support it, because I just don't think the American consumer has the disposable money.
Before we started, you were talking about cattle crush and that there might be an option over the next, X number of months to make some money. Explain that to me.
You have what's called a cattle crush. It's basically feeding cattle on the board, buying feeder cattle on the board, buying your corn on the board, and then selling your cattle on the board. And for the first time in 2 years, there's a little bit of margin in those fall cattle crushes. Typically, as a cattle feeder, you can put those on and then you unwind them as you bring in cattle, and that's supposed to lock in a margin for you. You've been unable to do any of that for over 2 years, and now finally there's starting to be some margins show up. So that's encouraging to me as a cattle feeder, you know, that there's margin somewhere.
Yeah.
I think what's going to help us finally next fall is if a big crop comes to fruition, we're going to get this corn price down where actually we can do some work.
The grain analysts, the term they use for corn has been range bound for so long, but now we're going to see a few legs probably from ethanol with gas prices going higher. For you as a buyer, where are you?
I've got a lot of cattle purchase corn purchase, because I still believe it's pretty much in stone. Corn supply is going to be really tight until the combines hit the field next fall. Next fall is a long time away. And I think you're going to see some really tight physical corn supplies, especially with, you brought it up, ethanol's back in gear. Those plants are going to kick back in gear. They're going to grind up a lot of corn. They're going to use up a lot of available supply, and I think corn is going to be really tight. Now next fall, it's a totally different world. I think we could end up with some definitely sub $6 corn. You may even get to sub $5 corn, which is great for us in the cattle industry because we can do a little work then.
We know that there's probably a high chance that you'll see another high set in the cattle market. When do you think that we might see that?
Great question. I think we're going to have a nice run into Memorial Day like we typically do. Then you're probably going to see a little bit of a swoon. I don't think it'll be as bad as normal. Typically you have a $12 to a $15 break in the spring from the high to the low. I think we've kind of put that in already. I think we put that in earlier. We broke this market in the last 60 days about $11. So I think we're kind of done that. I still think you'll have your typical swoon after Memorial Day. I don't think it'll be as great. Then it's going to be really interesting to see how tight cattle supplies get next fall and what the economy can support. You may really see something special, but I'm not one of these people that's in the $1.50 camp.
Next week, we'll talk with Darren Newsom from DTN at the Triumph of Ag Expo in Omaha. Ever since this country's soybean crop was pulled from the field, many farmers have been looking to the southern hemisphere at Brazil's 2013 production. At the World Soybean Research Conference in South Africa, we spoke with Alexandre José Cattelan, the director of Embrapa Soybean in Brazil. Embrapa is one of 45 research units of the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation. You'll hear in our interview the problems Brazilian farmers faced in growing this season's crop, the issues with exporting its production, and the harvest status in what is now the world's leading soybean export nation.
Well, the crop, it's going very well so far. We just are facing some problems with excessive rain during the harvest time in some regions of the country, especially in the Middle West. But I believe that will not hurt much the production, so we expect a very nice season overall.
What size of crop are you looking at this year, an estimate?
Around an estimate of between 82 and 83 million tons.
What's the growth in that from maybe 10 years ago?
It's 10 years ago, it was a lot, but comparing to the last season, it's about 9 to 10%.
Okay. What's the growth in soybeans? I mean, why have soybeans succeeded in Brazil?
Well, I would say many reasons, you know, because Brazil has a lot of available land still, especially in the Middle West, the Cerrado region, how we call it, Mato Grosso state, Goiás state, Minas Gerais, Bahia state. And in that region, we have a very good distribution of rainfall during the summertime, the time that we crop soybeans in Brazil. And also because the soils that, although they are very poor chemically speaking, but it's very easy to handle, then if we lime them and fertilize, so the production is very good.
Are there GMO crops in Brazil? What's the percentage of the breakdown there?
We estimate that in this present season is around 90%. And so we still have some regions of the country where most of soybeans are non-GMO. Some regions of Mato Grosso where we have 70% of non-GMO soybeans. And the state of Rondônia, that's near Mato Grosso, just up north, we have virtually 100% non-GMO. It's not a big production, it's around 400,000 hectares, in that state. But even so, it's important to supply, especially the European demand for that, because they pay a premium for the farmers.
What are some of the concerns you have during the growing season, whether it be disease-wise or just issues during the growing season?
Yeah, so we have some issues. For instance, the Asian rust, soybean Asian rust, it's a major problem. The farmers have to spread many times. In average, I would say 3, but it goes up to 5. So it costs a lot of money for the farms. We are facing problems with nematodes. And in this particular season, we faced problems with caterpillars, what is not that common, but in this season we had some problems. And besides the agronomic part of it, we have logistic problems, because the volume of production is increasing, but not the infrastructure, roads, waterways, ports, and storage facilities. So that's a problem, and we have to improve that.
That's something that U.S. farmers are obviously keeping an eye on as they look towards the export season. How important is that problem for Brazil?
Well, I would say it's very important. Because the farmers are facing, they have to storage their production on trucks, actually, on the roads, because there is not enough storage facilities for that. And the ports are not totally equipped to ship the production, to export, and we export a large extent of what we produce. So that's a major problem for Brazil.
So it's just that they aren't built yet, they aren't ready for the capacity, is that correct?
Yeah, they are not ready for the capacity, yes.
When you look at the ports, how many years out do you think that process is, or the infrastructure overall? What's the process of getting that up to speed?
Well, we don't know for sure. There is a government plan for that. There is money, budget for that, and they call the PAC program for that. Actually, it's late. It should be much more advanced than it is right now. But we hope that in several years we will have it.
We'll continue our coverage from South Africa next week as we show you why the African continent has a huge potential for agricultural growth. We'll also show you our discussion with Kip Cullers, who holds the world record for growing 160.6 bushels of soybeans per acre. Since we're only a few weeks away from spring, we thought it might be a good time to check in with Al Dutcher to see how precipitation this winter affected drought conditions in Nebraska and what farmers and ranchers might be able to expect as temperatures warm up over the next couple of months.
We only got a couple areas that are close to normal right now, and that would be in the southeastern part of the state, particularly around the Nebraska City area, a little bit up around just a little northwest of Valentine, and some of that's a reflection of the October precipitation. We still are carrying a significant deficit from the northeast all the way through the southwest, where we're running 2 to 4 inches behind normal since October. So in reference in terms of percents of normal, almost mirroring like we seen last year at the same time, where we were really concerned about the northeast, we kind of expanded that. And the other thing we have to remember is we're carrying those deficits from the previous cropping season. So we are on top of these deficits. You're going to add another 14-inch departures for the previous cropping season up in the northeast, 9 to 12 across the west. That's why we think that this drought is going to be with us, at least in a hydrological sense, because it's going to be very difficult to overcome those significant deficits.
Do the models show anything as far as precipitation or moisture once we get closer to that planting day and beyond?
Well, that's the hope. Yeah. These 2 big storms did miss. The one missed us to the south, but it laid out a fairly decent foundation of snow. So we have to have it wet to the south of us. We got that. You know, there's signs that we may see a couple more of those move through, but as we progress through the spring, the jet stream should start lifting northward. As long as these lows are aggressive coming in the western United States and intense as they were with these 2 blizzards to the south of us, that moisture will help feed these systems, and we won't dry slot as much. And hopefully we'll see some generation of this significant moisture, and we're going to need it. We expect to receive 4 inches in western Nebraska over the next 2 months. In southeast Nebraska, close to 6. So we got to maintain normal, plus try to cut into at least 50% of those deficits before we get into planting season.
Talk about planting season. Last year, so many farmers were in the field so early because it was so nice, so warm. The soil temps were so much above average. So what do you expect to see in that regard this year?
Well, we're certainly different this year.
Yeah.
You know, based on all the models I can see, we are not going to see the warm-up like we've seen last year. I expect we're going to be below normal on average for at least the first 15 days of the month, and there's some signs that that may continue all the way through March, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
We need to stay cooler than normal, get this moisture into the profile, help to get at least something to rely on, and then pray that the cooler conditions will generate, with that snowpack to the north of us and the warm conditions to the south, will generate some big thunderstorm activities moving into April and May, really start to build up our profile. So that's our only hope. Otherwise, we're going to be living rainfall to rainfall, especially in our dryland environment.
Quickly, any hint of what the summer might hold?
Well, that's the big question. You know, I'm watching the equatorial Pacific. We've had a cold pool of water there. You know, one thing about that is it does lead to severe weather events in the spring. That's the high probability in the Central Plains. The problem is if it continues into the summer, we tend to see a drier pattern established in the later half of the summer, and that's what I don't want to see. Secondarily, the last thing we need to pay attention to is the Central Rockies snowpack. We need to get that up near normal because that will help hold the heat from the southwest building into our region as we progress through the summer.
Al will have more in a few minutes when he gives his weekly weather forecast. Drought may make soybeans more vulnerable to certain diseases in 2013. One you'll read about in the March Nebraska Farmer is charcoal rot. Charcoal rot is caused by a fungus that survives in soils, and UNL Extension plant pathologist Lauren Giesler says it can also strike other crops like corn and sorghum. Giesler says soybeans infected by charcoal rot can produce flat pods, be stunted, and have reduced vigor. You can read his recommendations on charcoal rot, as well as other articles about corn diseases, in the March Nebraska Farmer. While most of central Nebraska saw above average precipitation in the month of February, large pockets of the Panhandle received less than ½ an inch of moisture. We talked with UNL Extension educator Berger this week about current and future grazing options and what it looks like in his areas of Cheyenne, Kimball, and Banner counties.
Well, the condition honestly is sobering. As we look at the moisture we've gotten over the winter, it's been disappointing. We've had some opportunities that haven't materialized in terms of moisture. You know, the good thing is the months of March and April, May are still ahead of us, and that's really when we get a lot of moisture that has a beneficial impact in terms of forage growth on pasture and rangeland. But the long-range forecast is not looking very good either. If you look at the Drought Monitor, their long-range forecast is not positive in terms of precip at this point. And so I think with that in mind, we need to begin making some decisions and plans now for what's going to be, in my mind, probably a forage shortage as we look towards the grazing season for 2013.
I'm going to ask you about figuring out the size of what you're going to need. And the reason I ask, I'm sure many producers have figured it out or know how to figure it out, but the reason I ask is because the size of the herd, because of the drought, is probably so drastically different from anything they've seen in the past. What are the recommendations there?
Well, I think if we would get average precip in the months of March, April, May, we're going to have 30% less forage production than average just because of how dry it was last year and the detrimental effect that had to that plant vigor and plant health. Again, that's just if we got average precip and if we got good growing conditions. The outlook is that we're not going to see that. And so, you know, people last year had the opportunity to oftentimes use some residual forage from the year prior. I'm recommending that folks look at least at 2 to 3 weeks delayed turnout in normal. You know, I think a stocking rate planning even now of only stocking 60% of normal is a good plan at this point. And if we don't get some significant precip in the months of March and April and May, then we're going to need to make even more drastic reductions in terms of stocking rate looking at this summer.
How does the current winter wheat crop play into that? I know it's probably not good, but what do producers have for that?
You know, the wheat crop at this point doesn't look very good. We did not get very good germinations in many cases, and then we've had a lot of just dry type conditions and haven't had much snow cover. You know, wheat's an amazing crop, and I've seen times when the wheat crop looked pretty tough and we got some right conditions in March, April, and May, and it came out looking pretty decent. So I think the story is still to be told there yet, but I think producers I work with are talking about the option of at least securing some summer annual seeds to plant for forage in the event that that wheat crop is not going to be something they can salvage, and then going back in and planting an annual forage. If people are considering doing that, I'm encouraging them to secure their seed now. Because of the drought we had last summer, there is a shortage of summer annual seeds in this region, and finding that seed, if you're waiting till May, June, could be pretty difficult.
I want to ask you about alfalfa. In a recent webinar, you listed the water that's needed for forages, and you based it off of how many tons you can produce with the forage, and alfalfa is not water efficient. Are you recommending an alternative to alfalfa this spring?
I think if you already have an alfalfa in production under a pivot, really alfalfa, although it's not as water use efficient, we're looking at around 7 inches of water to produce a ton of forage on alfalfa. Whether we're looking at a summer annual, we can be around 2.5 to 3. But the thing about alfalfa is that it's a crop we can harvest multiple times throughout the season. And even though it's not as water use efficient as some summer annuals or even some cool season annuals, it's a crop that's a real high quality. It allows for multiple harvests, and it's also extremely deep rooted. Alfalfa uses water in a profile down 5-6 feet if it goes down that far. And so it's really an advantage from that standpoint. The other thing about alfalfa is extremely drought tolerant. We can water it early in the spring and early summer, get a first and second cutting, and then shut the water off to it, and it'll be just fine. And so although it's a higher water use crop in my mind, just because of also the value that it has right now in terms of the market, I wouldn't just go ahead and tear that out just because it's a little higher water use, because of the value that forage is going to have this year especially.
Finally, Aaron, I know you're recommending both direct and windrow grazing coming up this spring. Explain to me how windrow grazing can be efficient.
So one of the things we look at when we look at forage production on annual forages is how they accumulate growth. And as they move from that vegetative stage into that reproductive stage, which is that early head to milk stage of maturity, that's when the maximum amount of forage produced is really available there. And if we can find a way to capture that, and through an example like windrow grazing, we can maximize pounds of forage harvested per acre. If we windrow graze and use something like strip grazing to harvest that efficiently, I think we can maximize the amount we capture per acre. Whether if we were to turn those cattle out earlier when it's in the vegetative stage, it's higher quality, and maybe that works well for some weaned calves or some cattle we're looking to put some gain on. But if we're looking at something like cow-calf pairs or even dry cows, we can let that forage get to a greater state of maturity and actually harvest more pounds of forage per acre and capture more forage, I think, using a windrow grazing type situation in the year we're in now, where forage is at a premium and anything we can get is a value.
Now with this week's weather forecast, here's UNL Extension State climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. Of course, last week we talked about the potential for the big storm to come out and give us some pretty good significant snowfall. Unfortunately, we had to tape the Market Journal forecast on Wednesday due to the previous storm, and over the couple days period, the models did change, and that system did sag to our south and really wallop southern Kansas, northern Oklahoma. So in a retrospect, it's pretty good because we at least got some moisture at the surface, so we can get some more storm system moving through the next couple months. At least there's a foundation of low-level moisture to juice up these storms. Now, as we go into the future, we do have a system that's coming down the pipe from the northern plains that's expected to move in during the early part of next week that has the potential to generate some widespread moisture across the state and the outside possibility of some significant snowfall if the system does slow down as anticipated. So let's get right away to the upper air models and see how we can track this storm as it goes through our region and what the potential is after that storm leaves. Well, here's the upper air ridge that's expected to build into this weekend. So we're going to see temperatures consistently warming up throughout the weekend. Don't anticipate any significant weather. If there is any clouds, they'll be over eastern Nebraska early in the Saturday period, but by the time we get to the afternoon hours, we are looking at clearing conditions and a warming trend as we go into Sunday. But here comes this new storm system out of the northern plains. It's supposed to sweep through Nebraska, and the time frame is a little iffy, but right now we're thinking sometime Monday it'll start to enter the state and give us a chance of precipitation. Here you can see it on Monday as it comes on Monday afternoon, sitting over in central and eastern Nebraska. And there is a potential that this thing could stall out and give us some decent snowfall, particularly as we get into Tuesday morning. This model looks like it's being very aggressive. The newest models have slowed it down somewhat, but if it does indeed slow down, keep a track of the weather because conditions can change, and at this time of the year, the models are notoriously terrible about predicting overall storm track. But we will see some ridging conditions come back in. Now, I think it's being over-aggressive in terms of the warmth, but right now they're supplanting a pretty significant ridge coming into our region for a couple days, particularly as we get into Wednesday. This ridge will start to move quickly to the east, and notice we have another trough that's going to be diving into the western United States, and that'll make its way in toward the Intermountain region as we get into Thursday and start to crank up. Again, this may be moving a little bit fast. It may dig a little deeper. And as we get into Friday, what we will notice is it tries to split this energy into two pieces. I'm not very confident of this, but under this type of scenario, we could get some significant moisture across western Nebraska. And if this holds together, of course, we'd be under the gun here in eastern Nebraska. So let's take a look at the temperature forecast. We're looking at some fairly cool conditions across the northeastern part of the state this weekend with fairly warm temperatures across the west. And then we'll see that cool down in Monday and Tuesday with the chance of rain and snow. And we'll have to watch Tuesday for updated forecasts to see whether or not the snow does materialize across eastern Nebraska. And then a general warming trend. We may be a little bit warm on the temperatures this weekend, but we'll wait and see. Might be a little cooler than what they're saying. But the overall 8 to 14-day forecast next week through the following Tuesday does keep the cool air in place. And in terms of precipitation, we're looking at the vast majority above normal to our east.
Thanks, Al. Our interviews with Mike Briggs, Alexandre José Cattelan of Brazil, Al Dutcher, and Aaron Berger are archived on the Market Journal website as part of the March 1st episode. A quick programming note before we go. In 2 weeks, the March 16th episode of Market Journal will not be seen in its Saturday time slot on NET1. It will still air in its regular time slot on NET2 Sunday at 9 a.m. Central. Next week, we'll report from the 2013 Triumph of Ag Expo in Omaha. Darren Newsom will be our marketing analyst. We'll show you our interview with world record soybean grower Kip Cullers, and we'll tell you why Africa could become a major player in agriculture. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
No matter how you look at it, animal agriculture helps Nebraska's economy. The livestock industry provides increased tax revenues for schools and community services. Livestock enterprises also create jobs while contributing to existing businesses such as local banks and grocery stores. A thriving livestock industry helps maintain our current way of life, but also provides opportunities for the next generation of farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff helps to raise awareness of the importance of animal agriculture to Nebraska.